Mommy's not dead. She doesn't know what death is like. What are you talking about?
That's true. Did you ever read her quote on the back of Jazz? I think that's really cool. I think it explains a lot of what her work goes. She says, jazz music was not originally for anyone but its players. It was always clear what its painful sources were, and yet it does what art is supposed to do. It makes another thing possible. That is how I want my work to be, a private thing for public consumption. I think that really expresses like what we were talking about earlier, how she's able to explain what black women are going through in the Bluest Eye.
And it's such a sensitive issue too. A lot of races or a lot of cultures, they all have something they have to deal with, and it just, I think a lot of authors don't present that way. They present it as like, oh, it's a black thing and they're weird, or like, just, you know what I mean? They're just really making like a big stink about it, and they're really, the way it's done is really one-dimensional or two-dimensional. But the way she does it is just really, it makes it clear, it makes it very personal, because it's a very personal issue, and it's very.
She almost pushes that by making her choosing characters who are weird, you know, the weirdest black people she could possibly think of, you know, in America.
Exactly.
And then
making them seem
really
totally normal.
You know, and it's,
totally.
How does that happen? Right.
But the thing is that you kind of, or at least I feel like I know people like that, you know, like I can pick out the weirdest character in the book, and he reminds me of my cousin so-and-so, you know, I mean.
You have weird cousins.
I think I would end up saying, yes, very much, I wanted to bear witness. But the first impulse to write was curiosity. I really wanted to know something that I thought I could not know unless I imagined it for myself. Not that it would be any final answer, but some of the things you've asked me about in the beginning, what was central in the literature that I read was never me. A female, young, black, those characters didn't exist in the major literature, and when they did, they were on the edges, on the margins somehow, caricatures or some technical solution when the author wanted comedy. But I was interested in what kind of book or what reading experience could be the consequence of shaping a piece of art around that kind of person. Me, or someone like me, or someone I knew. And I wanted to know, so it sucked in like a magnet a lot of questions I had, a lot of memories I had, a lot of painful experiences I had witnessed or been privy to. All of that sort of collected around the idea of shaping the Bluest Eye, around vulnerable subjects of society, and not the kind of life that I had, as I've described to you, but precisely what must it be like to grow up without that nurturance and be the victim of racism. How devastating that must be. Because I did not have it. I had no sense of it as a child. So it was an interest in people I knew who very much were, for whom it was who had been disabled by it and were constantly chewing it, gnawing over it as the principal event in their lives, constructing a victim or victimized life, as opposed to the little girls who are with her, who are entirely different, who are feisty and curious and investigative and sort of funny, and, you know. So I wanted the two kinds of responses to social devastation to be in the first book that I wrote, but it's through the view of little, young, black girls.
as with the Bluest Eye. The whole
What
book
was
was on.
That was. Because I didn't read it.
That was the one where the little girl, who always thought she was ugly, wished she had blue eyes, and it really talked about the effect that that I guess growing up in a country of when you're being bombarded with images of white beauty, what kind of effect that has on little black girls. And this one poor girl, she grew up in a very, I guess, difficult household, but she always wished she had blue eyes, so that, you know, she thought that if she were beautiful and if she had blue eyes, then everything in her family would be fine, and everything would work out.
She has this little doll too. Isn't it like a white doll with like blonde hair and blue eyes?
Yeah.
And she's like always carrying this doll.
Right. And she ends up, instead of actually, you know, confronting this whole issue, she ends up getting raped by her father, and then just going crazy towards the end of the book. And instead of, the only way she's really able to deal with this imagery and dealing with this imagery is to become crazy. She finds solace in an imaginary friend, and she lives for that imaginary friend by the end of the book. So it's really sad.
Doesn't she also think that she has blue eyes?
Yeah, exactly. She really does. She actually does believe she has blue eyes. So it's sort of like the tragedy of what could happen.
I was physically revolted by and secretly frightened of those round moronic eyes, the pancake face, and the orange worm's hair. I destroyed white baby dolls, but the dismembering of dolls was not the true horror. The truly horrifying thing was the transference of the same impulses to little white girls. The indifference with which I could have axed them was shaken only by my desire to do so. To discover what eluded me, the secret of the magic they weaved on others. What made people look at them and say, "Oh," but not for me? The eye slide of black women as they approached them on the street, and the possessive gentleness of their touch as they handled them.
The Bluest Eye is the one I liked the most.
It's like your favorite book?
Yeah.
And was that... Because I told you Ken read that book, and he
didn't like it at all?
No, he was totally moved by it.
Oh, really?
I thought it was interesting because, you know, my brother is like, you know, this Korean male. And I think, in a way, though, he really identified with that, just growing up as a minority in this overwhelming, you know, white American culture, or, you know, generally Western culture of beauty, or just, you know, what is beautiful and stuff. And I think he really, you know, felt that spoke to him. But it's kind of strange because, you know, I mean, you can see it speaking to you more than somebody like my brother, you know. But I don't know. I mean, is that why it moved you? Or?
I guess, yeah. I guess so. I mean, I never really thought about it. Like, what? No, that's not really true. I guess I did think about why it moved me, but it was more just, it just seemed so true.
There's so many images and ideas that you grow up with, and you just don't, and you really don't understand as a young person what makes somebody else so much prettier than you. And now reading that, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And all the little sort of trials that Piccola went through seemed so normal to me. I mean, I guess she sort of went over the deep end, but I could see that happening to people I know.
I mean, it was normal too for her to go crazy and stuff. And
I think, well, she was like an extreme. She was like an extreme example. I mean, I think she was like the potential of how far it could get.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think that would have been, you know, normal, but I could see it as being possible. Maybe not necessarily to that degree, but, you know, for I guess for a lot of black women to a slight degree, yeah.
I never lived in a separate black world. There were no neighborhoods that were only black. The separation was class. All the poor people lived together and the less poor. But my girlfriends, even now when I talk about a girl I grew up with, whom I talked to a couple of weeks ago, her name is Rosemary Magazzini, the Yagabatsis, the Tertia, they all live on our street now. And it was that kind of town. It was a steel town. It's a place where poor people went to find work. There were factories there. And lots of first-generation immigrants, lots of East European people, lots of Italian people, lots of people like my people my mother came to that town when she was 6 years old. My father when he was 14, from the South looking for labor. So that was the mix. So I didn't really understand. There were no differences that were important in human relationships. I knew that there were adults who would not permit me to do things. Go to this park, or go to this movie, or sit in this restaurant. My father and mother assumed a position of moral superiority over those people. So I never felt devalued, which is why I began to write The Bluest Eye, because as an adult living at that time in Washington, D.C., and having traveled in the South and seen for myself the things that my parents had taken for granted, was a kind of investigation into precisely that question. What are these differences? And how does it work on the inside? We know there are differences, but the question is, what difference does difference make?
So that was your favorite?
That's my favorite.
That's your favorite?
Yeah. And then I think Beloved.
I think Beloved's my favorite.
Why?
I don't know. Well, I had to read it twice, and then analyze it a couple times before I could really figure it out. And I think it might have been for I don't know, literary reasons that I enjoyed it more. I really I don't know. I really liked the idea of the ghost as a living memory of slavery that keeps returning to haunt people. And even though the book was set, I don't know, 100 years ago, it didn't seem that distant to me. I mean, like this ghost beloved could be, I think she could appear anytime, if she wanted to. And I think that's why I liked it. I don't know. She wrote Beloved not necessarily about slavery itself, but about slaves, about the people and what they were thinking. And that part, I don't know, it might have appeared, I think it appeared in the book we just read for Black Women's Studies. The woman who, remember when Sethe killed her baby? That was actually based on a true story. There was a woman who actually, and I didn't know that.
Days ago, actually.
And then that added such a new dimension to the book, because she was sort of prying into what this woman was thinking, not wanting her kid to go through the horrors of slavery. So
it makes it, it really does change the book when you know that that's a true story. Because at first it just seems so shocking that anyone would actually do that. But then knowing that someone actually did.
But then, I think, and the beauty about the book is that you can kind of understand it. It makes sense.
Right.
It totally makes sense.
That's the one thing I was going to say earlier when you said, like, the way she makes the characters, and they're so intense and so, like, powerful that they're doing these weird things, but you can understand why they're doing them.
Lots
it makes
of really
sense.
strange things go on.
Even really horrible things,
Right.
like in Song of Solomon and stuff, like killing people, but you get inside of the characters and she really explains it in terms of their past and their cultural inheritance and stuff. And it's strange because you don't expect to understand behavior like that,
For me too, I don't think I realize when I'm reading them, like, what's going on. Like, I don't realize that all these terrible things are going on because they just seem so natural to the book.
I do put people into situations that require them to behave theatrically because I want to see what makes it work. If I'm writing about the average person who goes to work every day, I have to impose on that person some extraordinary circumstances. But if I'm writing about people who are individualistic or eccentric or deeply passionate, then I can reveal certain kinds of things about the environment in which they live or the kinds of people they are. If I want to talk about friendship or love, I have to get people who are theatrical enough to be totally committed to one way or another and to react in very dramatic ways. There are other ways of doing that, which is much more subtle, much more quiet, much more understated, which other writers are brilliant at. And I love reading those kinds of books as well. My subtlety comes in other ways. You know, you get sort of terrifically interesting people, and you work the subtlety in the language, not in the character. Also, I am aware of, I was always fascinated by the adults I knew, the clarity of their vision about themselves. I don't know, people seem more interesting to me then than they do now. We all seem to be pretty worn and conventional and predictable. So my sense as a child's wonder at the complexity of women and men and their relationships, the sound of their voices when they were in love or in hate, or their weeping, or when something terrible had happened. You know, that was incredibly interesting to me, so I've replicated some of that. And then, of course, they do things outwardly that we only think about. Nobody can think that the murder of one's child is anything but monstrous, even when it comes out of a sense of love and possession. But that's an extraordinary response to extraordinary circumstances. On the other hand, every parent knows how it feels when a child is no longer obedient. What do we say when the child says, you know, we have these phrases of restraint out of love. We say frequently to children, particularly when they get to be, 16, your life is not worth living unless you do it my way. It's just a variation on that theme taken to its, final conclusion, where a civilized person does not go all the way out there. There's some point at which you compromise. But suppose you didn't compromise, this is what it would look like. How much can love break the beloved into parts? And when is it too much? And when is it murderous? Just as murderous as no love at all. So with those kinds of issues, I sometimes do I frequently bring into play characters who, some people say they are larger than life, but I really think that they are not, because I think life is very large. It's we who have diminished it. Life is very big.
I think that's such a beautiful part of her works, is that there's I think a lot of black people feel like we're rootless, or we've been uprooted and we have no grounding in this country, and we have, no connections to Africa. That's why people are looking back to Africa so much. But I think it's beautiful for her to do this sort of thing, because it lets us know that there is something here in America, and that all of our struggles and, the historical trials of black people are what our culture is as African Americans, and that it is something to take pride in, because this sort of literature would never have happened, or the blues would have never happened, jazz would have never happened as musical forms. I think American popular culture would have never happened as it is today without sort of that background that we've had here. even though it was something that was born out of slavery and out of violence and out of a lot of pain, without it, it wouldn't be a culture worth speaking of today. And the fact that she's writing about it makes it, writing about it and getting it out internationally, I think, really gives us something more to hold on to. That we don't have to look outside of America for a source of pride for us. We can, look right here and look at writers and artists such as her, who have been able to express our culture to the rest of the world. And and it sort of proves that we do have this artistic capability on an academic level, and not just as entertainers or musicians or
that's a really good point
or
too.
athletes or political activists. That we can be writers and thinkers. This woman's got a brilliant mind, and it really goes to show that we are very well aware, I guess, of what our situation in America is like culturally and in relation to the outside world. No.
Yeah,
No, that's a really good point about the sort of lack of intellectual role models, or the popular figures are all entertainers, whether they're like singers or sports figures.
I think part of it is that there isn't so much a lack of intellectual role models when you look at Black history, but it's more a question of where you recognize intelligence. What you see as being intelligent, or if you're going to recognize a work of art. It's like when when people criticize her, Toni Morrison's receipt of the Pulitzer Prize or of the Nobel Prize as being a political gesture, and not seeing that her work is very intelligent and well-crafted and incredibly written, and that she is an incredible writer, and seeing it more as, something written by a Black female writer in America. Do you know what I mean? That, a lot of it is denying the intelligence in the art.
In the art forms,
Right.
I also remember writing on the sidewalk with stones. And so I remember myself arriving as a consciousness through print. At the same time, in my family, like most families then, the entertainment was self-generated. And they told stories. Adults told stories to themselves, and we were participants in those stories. It wasn't the way it is now, where adults are called upon or think they have to read to their children. This was very much an integrated process. When I watched my grandfather tell stories to his wife and to my mother and to his sons, stories they'd told before, but just repeated them. Same laughter, same excitement, maybe a little change. And I also remember when we were permitted or expected to tell stories ourselves to adults, and that we got their full attention. So there was a necessity for shaping it and performing it and altering it and making it ours in order to redeliver. Now, most of these stories were dreadful. They were usually ghost stories, or stories of exaggerated foibles of human beings, stories about what people did when they were excessively lazy and the consequences of laziness. But most of the ones I remember were the ghost stories. And they were not told to frighten us, because so much in the way they told these stories was a real acceptance of an enchanted world.
I think it's also inspirational that she's not a young woman. That to me, I think I really have. I'm glad to have a role model who is in the public eye that's an older woman, because this country puts so much emphasis on youth and how wonderful it is to be young. But she didn't really start. I think she wrote The Bluest Eye when she was close to 40, I think.
Yeah, that was her first.
Yeah, I didn't
And that was her
realize
first
how
book.
old she was.
Right, I didn't realize that either.
know.
But it's
She doesn't seem old.
She doesn't seem
she
old. I
doesn't
thought
seem
she
old
was
at
like,
all. But
like
it's
40.
it's really. I think it's great that that she is. She's kind of like I guess closer to my grandmother's age, and she doesn't
62.
she doesn't act it right. She doesn't act it. She doesn't carry it off that way. But it's wonderful to have, she's writing from experience. I mean, it's wonderful to have somebody who's writing from experience, from, 60 years of experience.
Right.
And sort of giving me something to look forward to, in a way. Just to know that 20 years from now, I can start my writing career.
Women aren't worthless once they hit 40.
Exactly.
There's a lot out there once you
Right.
lose your looks or, you start to get wrinkles, whatever. I mean, it's
Right.